In India, the practice of curating has a recent history, needless to say, one which evolved without the academic institutional support and is largely a self-taught art. But its advent marks a point of time which is significant in many ways. The mid-1990s saw not only the economic liberalization of the country and the rise and threat of the Hindu right, but its open borders and the global impact made it an era of self-criticism, when curators, along with artists and art critics, started to closely scrutinize works of art against the parallel histories. The proliferation of the biennales and triennales, the pouring of information and images provided ample support for shaping the Indian curator. However, today, we still are at a crisis, when in one half of the country, the advent of several institutions such as COGE have been providing alternative platforms, and academic groups such as the AQUA have been taking initiatives to propose curatorial studies to be included as part of the academic discipline, and a more complex configuration of disciplines and curricula is now being fulfilled by the JNU School of Art and Aesthetics. The other half of the country, where the academic structures are somewhat impoverished, such as in the eastern zone, the image of the curator is remarkably hazy. Curatorial ventures are seen as unacademic practices and are merely commercial ventures into a glam world. Curation is like pop art. It is suave, sexy, and glitzy, and therefore should be kept at bay from the academic framework. The role of the teacher curator is ostensibly that of an uncaring stepmom who is insufficient for pedagogical teaching. Against such a backdrop, we're going to listen to 4 curators who come from very different disciplines, and we're going to start with Gayatri Sinha. Gayatri, your curatorial practice starts from the mid-1990s, which is a very crucial time for the shaping of the Indian curator. I spoke about the social and economical changes, but since you come from a sort of multidisciplinary field where you were educated in economics and the media, I'd like to know sort of your intervention into the field. And of course, the role of the curator in a gallery space.
Okay. This will go back about 14, 15 years to about the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, 2 or 3 things have happened. If it's okay, may I just create 1 minute of context? I think the generation of artists that enter art colleges in the 70s, are very prepared. 70s and 60s are very prepared for major exposition. That's one. And this was particular to my field, certainly in the 90s when we were looking at gender. That was very important. Photography archives became an issue of concern. So that was very important. That was something that one could develop. So I'll just go through the main points. And the third was that there was, between about the mid-90s to mid-2000s, there was a collaboration between the private-public sphere. By this I mean that the National Gallery of Modern Art was certainly open to a private gallery coming and saying, can I have a show here? And this was a very fecund kind of a period because it meant that government intervention was minimal. You got the space. Somebody else intervened and could create an exhibition. And now when you look back on it, you realize it was actually a sort of a moment of epiphany. It's not coming back. Now, if we look at the art structure as a sort of a pyramid, the upper spaces of the biennales and the museums are, there is no biennale. The triennale seems to have sort of died on itself. The museums are more and more moribund. They've stopped collecting art. And the lower part is quite active, which is really the gallery circuit. But the gallery circuit now doesn't have very much to do with the museum and institution space. My own practice actually then came out of this moment of excitement and synergy. My book, Expressions and Evocations, Contemporary Women Artists, had been published in 1996. And there was the realization that we do not have, just as this publication was the first of its kind, we haven't had a major exhibition of women artists in the public domain. There had been one in the NGMA in the mid-1980s, but it had come and gone quite quietly. So at this point, a private gallery, Espas, approached me, and we got an enormous amount of support from the NGMA to do the show. But it was quite mad in a certain sense, because you got 2.5 days to hang the show. There was a strike from the people who drive vans. Mrs. Modi's, somehow from Modi Nagar, got vans to take away the Raza exhibition, which was hanging before that. The PWD painted it overnight. And within 3 or 4 days, you mounted an enormous exhibition of 150 works. So this was not a professional curatorial space. It still isn't. I imagine if you did a show in the NGMA, you'd probably go through the same harrowing experience even today. But what it did do was it allowed a sort of movement into other exhibitory spaces very quickly. And now I look back on my career between the mid-90s to the early 2000s, I worked quite a lot with the government institutions. I did a photography exhibition with the National Museum, which was fantastic. That was entirely determined by space. The show was called Middle Age Spread. And the analogy, of course, is with the human body. In middle age, the body starts to become flabby and old. And I was considering the nation at the age of 56. Is the nation old and flabby? Because what happened to the movement of nationalistic enterprise and enthusiasm? So for this, we wanted Cartier-Bresson's pictures. The Cartier-Bresson archive is in the IGNCA. And we didn't know, there was absolutely no way you could pay Magnum 18 or 20,000 francs at that point to use one Cartier-Bresson. I wanted 12. So at that point, one approached the director of the IGNCA, and he said, why don't you just have it in the National Museum? So this was because he was the director of both these sites. So it was absolutely wonderful to bring a modern and contemporary art exhibition, bring it to the 1940s, and then trace it up. Because then, I think there's something that other people would also like to speak about. What character does an institutional space lend to a curated exhibition? It carries with it an enormous amount of history, personality, the force of its art objects, the force of the writing that's gone around a major collection. So to bring a modern and contemporary art exhibition, a photography exhibition into the National Museum was a spectacular moment for me. But I think if I were to compare the present moment to what has gone before, the big issue certainly is the retraction of major spaces, the major institutional spaces, disinterested, generous, open. That seems to be certainly something of the past. And what we have seen after about 2007 is a flooding of the international curator coming into the Indian art space. In 2007, there is Suman, Gopinath here and me. We both did shows. She did one in Europe, I did one in the United States. Again, my work was of photography and lens-based work, which was called India, Public Places, Private Spaces, Contemporary Video and Photography. I had an American co-curator. So the movement out was very much a mark of the mid-2000s. And that was something that could be seen as a possibility, a great possibility for Indian art. What did happen was, of course, that the international curator comes in and starts to sort of vitalize or dynamize the circuits within India. And with the recession now, that's also receding. So we are probably, you mentioned crisis. Yes, we are probably at the cusp of a bigger change in terms of how we're going to historicize, what are the spaces that we're going to be able to use in our curatorial aspirations.
Yes. How have group shows been significant in your curatorial practice? Since you have group shows with about, say, 20 artists together.
Yeah, group shows, because I think I have not, let me draw a parallel between my work as a critic, which came first. I was a critic with the Hindu for 10 years before I became a curator. While I was a critic with the Hindu and I had done the book, the exhibition came. So I am primarily a critic curator where dealing with writers and dealing with ideas has been the premise for the exhibition, and therefore the exhibition develops out of a critical argument. This is actually for me this is an intensely interesting formulation. I have not done any monographs other than one on Krishan Khanna. So if I had been perhaps a monograph writer like a lot of Indian writers are, then I would have perhaps logically been a curator of the solo show. I think there would be a logical integrity and progression in something like that.